Welcome to the Plan, Platform Approval, and Cab Approval video for Cherwell iTicket. In this video, we will be following the change management workflow as it moves out of the test phase and into the plan implementation phase, then to the platform approval phase, and possibly to the cab approval phase. These phases are used for both standard and infrastructure changes. During the planning phase, the following items need to be confirmed: the change schedule, implementation summary and details, backout plan, and communication plan. As mentioned previously, the start and end dates are for implementation and no longer include the verification phase. For standard changes, you should link to a release. We will now switch to the tool to demonstrate how to link and change release dates. In this example, the implementation is not linked to a release. You will need to click on Link to Release and pick the appropriate release. Once you've found the appropriate release, you can click on it, and that's the number that will be associated with the release. Next, you will need to sync both the implementation start date and implementation end date with the release. If necessary, you can change from one scheduled release to another. This might happen because of some kind of delay in the overall change process. Simply pick the other release and confirm. At this point, you will need to resync the implementation start and implementation end dates. If necessary, you can also unlink your change from the release schedule, creating an out-of-cycle release. Simply click on the release, hit OK, and you're now disconnected from the release schedule. You can now change the date of implementation, start and end to whatever you want. However, this will be an out-of-cycle release and will require additional oversight. To do a standard release out of the normal release cycle, you will need to get the approval of the release manager, the primary platform owner, and you will need to check the emergency/exception box at the top of the screen. Next, we need to review and update the service disruption plan so that the platform owner and others understand any possible outages. Next up is looking at the backup plan. Make sure that what you need to revert is going to be available as quickly as your worst case scenario. In the planning section, you'll need to make sure that you have a summary of the implementation changes that are going to be happening and a communication plan. Does the business know what changes are going to be made, how and when outages and changes are going to be communicated? These are the types of questions that should be answered in the communication plan area. Additional detail can always be added as an attachment. Speaking of attachments, a quick review of how to attach documents is a good idea. Attach a file or import a file is the correct choice. You can attach almost any type of file to your change. In this case, we'll attach a WAV file of an audio just like this. If you look in the properties area, you can see that it's imported, and you can actually attach notes into the area to explain what the particular file is. Another type of attachment is a link. This should generally not be used. Attaching the same file will result in nobody but yourself being able to get to the file. I've attached a file from my C drive, which once linked cannot be accessed by anybody else in the company. Not a good idea. Occasionally a linked file can be done, but it's generally to a public share. Unfortunately, you can't always control the security requirements on a public share. This again restricts the access to this file. Not a good idea. By right-clicking on the attachment, you have the option of removing the attachment. While almost any type of file can be attached, size is a consideration, so do not attach any sort of data files that would be very large. Implementation planning is when implementation tasks should be entered. The larger the amount of detail that can be added to the tasks, the less likely something will be overlooked. In the example on the screen, several tasks will be created for different teams. In the example, I'll assign each task to myself. However, in reality, these tasks would be spread over multiple people, often disconnected physically from each other. These tasks would generally not be chained together, as previous examples have shown, but would be timed, given expected times to help to ensure that appropriate resources are available at the appropriate time. Time alone, however, is not a substitute for good inter-team communication. Email, phone calls, and task closure together will ensure your change is completed effectively. As you can see, each task turns green as it's acknowledged by the person that will be performing the task. Now I'm going to jump ahead and add 3 more tasks to the implementation. They are in red and generally would be red until just before the implementation date. However, prior to implementation, they should all be green as the teams need to acknowledge that they are going to be performing the tasks. To give you a better idea of why time is important, I'm going to switch to the view that someone who would be performing the tasks might be seeing. In this example, you can see that they have specific times for tasks to be performed. Without times to guide them, they wouldn't know when any particular task needed to be performed and would have to rely on different systems to find out when tasks would need to be performed. When times are entered, they at least have a rough idea of when to look at a particular task. They can open a task and look for the specifics in the process, but when there are multiple tasks going on simultaneously, this becomes cumbersome and is the primary reason why we need times to be put in as an estimate of when things should be completed. Again, in this example, you can see how long it took to get back to one particular change for one particular task. As you can see, we have multiple different types of tasks. Green tasks are those that have been acknowledged by the user who's going to perform the task. Gray tasks are tasks that are completed. The blue task with the hourglass next to it is the task that is currently being worked on. Red tasks have not been acknowledged and need to be followed up on before the night of the implementation. At this point, we're done with this task and can close plan implementation and move on. Complete the task, put in some notes, and our next step is to submit this for platform approval. As we submit it, the status will change. To platform approval. Emails will be generated out to the platform approvers that they need to approve the change. It is the responsibility of the change owner to get platform approval from various platform owners. All of the platform approvals are required before implementation. If the change is on a regularly scheduled release, this might be as little as 2 days prior to implementation. However, items that are off-cycle or infrastructure changes should generally be approved by Monday at noon to be included for the general review at the Tuesday Change Advisory Board or CAB meeting. At this point, all the platform approvers have approved the change. This includes JDE, Web Development, and Title. In this case, JDE XE is the primary platform. However, all platforms involved in the change need to approve to ensure that appropriate resources are in place for your change. The movement from platform approval phase to implementation phase can be a little confusing. First, we'll follow the normal path. After the approvers have all approved the change should be moved to implementation. Sometimes this takes a few seconds or an F5 refresh to change the status. Unlike other status changes, the change owner doesn't perform the move from one phase to another. Instead, the action of the approvers does this. Once you are in the implementation phase, you are now allowed to make the changes during the implementation periods listed. A Change Advisory Board approval, or CAB approval, is another path. This is an extra step in place to add additional oversight on high or critical risk changes or emergency changes that bypass the normal release flow. If the release is not an emergency, you will need to wait until the CAB approval is given for your change to proceed. If your change is an emergency, make sure that you have the appropriate platform approval before proceeding. In the case of an emergency change that requires multiple platform owners to approve or affects multiple business units, an emergency CAB meeting may be necessary. In these cases, please contact the platform owner or duty manager to help facilitate these meetings. In the tool, the change owner needs to understand why their change may go to the CAB. The reasons are emergencies, exceptions, and elevated risk. The change owner should communicate with the platform owner the risks, since the platform owner may be asked detailed questions to gain CAB approval. On occasion, the platform owner may invite the change owner to explain complex changes to the CAB directly. This concludes the plan implementation, platform approval, and CAB approval video. The next video is implementation, verification, and closure.